The truck jolted to a stop, kicking up a wall of dust that swallowed the road behind it. Two men dragged Staff Sergeant Emily Reyes from the back and shoved her into the dirt. The heat hit her first. It pressed against her skin like a solid weight, baking through her uniform until the air itself seemed to vibrate. Sand filled her mouth and eyes as she rolled onto her side, wrists bound tight behind her back. The Sonoran Desert stretched in every direction, flat and merciless, the horizon wavering under the late afternoon sun. The lieutenant, Vargas, leaned from the cab and smiled. He tossed two half-full water bottles, so they landed just short of her reach. The bottles rolled slightly, catching the light before settling in the sand. His men laughed. One spat near her boot before climbing back onto the truck. Vargas watched her for a long moment, his tone mocking as he called her Delta, a word meant to sting more than flatter. Then the engine revved, and they were gone, the sound fading until there was nothing but wind and the ticking of metal cooling under the sun. Emily stayed still, her breathing steady. Panic wastes water and time. She turned her face slightly to study the shadows. The sun hung low, southwest, meaning she had maybe 2 hours before the temperature dropped. The wind carried from the south, light but constant, stirring fine dust that settled into her collar. She scanned the terrain's sparse cactus, dry brush, an uneven ridgeline to the east. Every detail was information, not emotion. Her throat ached with thirst, but she let the thought pass. She shifted her weight, testing the zip tie, marking each movement in her head like a drill. Survival, she reminded herself, never starts with motion. It starts with stillness. Emily Reyes grew up on the edge of Tucson, where the desert met the city in a long stretch of dry wind and stubborn life. Her father, Master Sergeant Robert Reyes, a retired Army Ranger, kept the house simple and quiet. He believed in order and observation, the kind of discipline that kept you alive in places where the world didn't care if you did. Most mornings he woke her before sunrise to stand on the back porch and watch the Catalina Mountains turn gold. He told her that the desert doesn't forgive weakness, but rewards awareness. She learned to watch for movement before sound, for shadow before shape. Those lessons never left her. When Emily was 11, her mother passed from an illness that took too long to name and too little to fight. Her father said nothing for weeks, but he made breakfast every morning and left the window open at night to let the wind move through the house. Emily took care of her younger sister Lena, who filled sketchbooks with stars and planets, things far away from the heat and dust. Emily learned responsibility early. By 16, she was working double shifts at a gas station and volunteering as an EMT at night, steady hands holding pressure on wounds while chaos moved around her. Calm became her habit, not a choice. At 19, she walked into a recruiting office downtown. The sergeant behind the desk looked up and asked if she had family in the service. She said yes. Rangers. The decision wasn't dramatic. It was direction. Basic combat training came next, and she found herself excelling not through strength, but through consistency. She did what she was told, and she did it right. While others shouted or argued, she listened, adapted, and got better. At Fort Benning's Airborne School, the instructors underestimated her. Small frame, kid voice, steady eyes. By the second week, they stopped underestimating her. Every jump was precise, every landing clean. When others panicked in the air, she counted seconds and corrected drift. Her path led her to communications training and eventually to a JSOC assignment as a Delta-attached NCO. The call sign Raven came later, not from mystery, but from reliability. The Raven always finds its way home. For Emily, that was never luck. It was training, discipline, and the steady belief that patience is power. The convoy rolled south through the desert, 4 vehicles in staggered formation, engines rumbling low against the sound of gravel. Two unmarked Toyota Land Cruisers led the way, followed by a Tacoma loaded with spare gear and a rear command truck where Staff Sergeant Emily Reyes sat with her headset pressed tight against her ear. The mission was simple on paper and complicated in reality: locate and recover an American advisor kidnapped by a cartel cell near a dry riverbed close to the border. The sun sat high, turning the horizon into a blur of white heat. Reyes checked her comms board and ran a quick verification on encryption sync. Call signs came through clearly. Bravo 1 for the lead, Bravo 2 for the follow, and her own as Raven 6. Captain Harris, the team leader, kept his tone steady on the net, issuing short commands, maintaining spacing at 75 meters, eyes scanning every ridge. Reyes tracked their movement on a folded map across her knee, marking distance with a grease pencil. The driver beside her called out coded terrain features, each word crisp and practiced. The road curved around a stretch of dry wash. Up ahead, Reyes saw smoke. A rusted sedan sat across the dirt track, two tires burning, thick black columns curling into the air. Captain Harris ordered a slow roll and visual check. Reyes adjusted her headset, switching between frequencies to monitor chatter. Her eyes caught something off. The soil to the left of the obstacle was smooth, freshly tamped. No wind marks. She called it out sharply, her voice even but urgent. Possible pressure trigger. Halt all movement. The warning came seconds before the explosion. The lead Land Cruiser vanished in a wall of fire and dust. Shockwave hit the second vehicle hard, glass and metal slicing the air. Reyes hit the floorboard. Instinct, driving her below the window line. RPK fire erupted from the left berm, heavy and rhythmic, while AK bursts cracked from the right, an L-shaped ambush. She steadied her breathing, switched to the alternate frequency, and transmitted, break, break, push to backup net. Coordinates locked. Gunfire filled the air, sharp and close. Reyes raised her head just enough to see silhouettes shifting through the smoke. Her mind broke the scene into steps: contact left, return fire, assess casualties, re-establish comms. Her pulse was steady. Around here, voices shouted orders. Above it all, she heard her own, calm and clear, the way she'd practiced it 100 times before. When the blast echo faded, the convoy was in pieces, the desert ringing with silence and smoke. She was already counting survivors. When Emily Reyes opened her eyes, the world was dust and heat and silence. The explosion had left a ringing in her ears that swallowed every other sound. The air smelled like burning rubber and fuel, thick enough to taste. Her mouth was dry. Her face was coated in grit. She tried to move, but found her wrists bound tight behind her back with plastic zip ties that bit into her skin. Her rifle lay twisted in the dirt, her radio crushed under the weight of the overturned truck. Smoke drifted low across the ground, carrying sparks from what was left of the convoy. Two of her teammates were still alive, dragged to the side by men with scarves over their faces. Their rifles were AK-47 seconds, mismatched magazines taped together. The fighters shouted to each other in a mix of Spanish and slang, movements erratic, weapon muzzles swinging without care. One kicked the radio aside. Another ripped the patch from her uniform and laughed, holding it up like a trophy. She stayed still. Panic never helps. She counted 6, maybe 7 of them. One with an RPK slung over his shoulder. Poor trigger discipline. Their stance and spacing told her they weren't trained soldiers. They pushed her to her knees, cutting the plate carrier from her chest and stripping her GPS and sidearm. Sweat stung her eyes. Her heart beat hard but steady. Then a different voice cut through the noise, calm and deliberate. Vargas. He walked with the confidence of someone who thought power was control. He looked her over, called her Delta with a sneer, said she didn't look like the kind of soldier they'd been warned about. She met his stare and said nothing. That silence unsettled him more than words ever could. They shoved her into the back of a pickup, dust kicking up as the engine started. The desert wind tore at her hair, filling her lungs with heat. She looked out toward the fading horizon and let her breathing even out. The desert had already taken her team. Her Gaar. Her name. What it couldn't take was her awareness. That. She kept. The truck disappeared into the haze, leaving Staff Sergeant Emily Reyes alone with the desert. The heat was relentless, pressing down on her like a living thing. The sand shimmered, the horizon bending in waves of white and gold. Her wrists were still bound, the plastic biting into her skin, and her throat ached from thirst. She let the panic come to the edge and stopped there. At Camp McCall, they had drilled it into her head. Control the body before you control the situation. Slow the breathing. 1 count in. 2 counts out. Heart rate down. Focus returns. She shifted her weight until her fingers found the edge of a buried stone. It was quartz, rough and sharp. She rubbed the plastic tie against it. Slow and steady. The friction burned her skin. But she didn't stop. The smell of melting plastic mixed with sweat. Each stroke wore the restraint thinner. When it finally snapped, she flexed her wrists. The pain, a reminder she was still functional. She scanned her surroundings. To the south, wind pushed thin lines of dust. Steady and light. The low ocotillo shrubs leaned slightly east, giving her both direction and distance. She remembered from training that the Sonoran wind shifts near dusk. Temperature drop means movement time. She'd have to wait. Shade first. Movement later. Crouching near a rock outcrop, she dug her hand, an inch beneath the surface. The sand was cooler, damp enough to leave residue on her fingers. She touched it to her tongue. Bitter, but proof of moisture. She used her body's shadow to reduce heat exposure, keeping movements minimal. Each action was deliberate, methodical. The silence pressed close, broken only by faint engine sounds in the distance. Motorcycles. 2 of them, sweeping the area. Reyes went still. Even her breathing slowed until it matched the rhythm of the desert. The sound faded. She started to hum softly. The low delta code tune used in escape drills, a fragment of sound. Meaningless to anyone else, but recognizable to those who knew. It steadied her more than it signaled anyone. As the sun slid lower, she adjusted her heading toward the east. No rescue would come soon. She accepted that. Survival was movement and timing. She whispered to herself, the same phrase that carried her through selection. Panic hides options. By late afternoon, the heat began to lose its edge. The desert stretched wide and silent. Nothing moving except the shimmer of air above the sand. Staff Sergeant Emily Reyes had stopped feeling fear hours ago. Now it was focus. She moved back toward the wreck of the pickup that had dumped her, keeping low. Using the truck's shadow for cover, the metal was still hot to the touch. She searched methodically, hands running over torn fabric, crushed gear, and burned plastic until she found it a damaged AN divided by PRC 152 amperes radio. The kind used by her team. The antenna was broken, the casing dented, but the red power light still blinked weakly. That was enough. Reyes knew transmitting openly could get her killed. Line of sight in this terrain meant anyone scanning the band could triangulate her position within minutes. Instead, she thought smaller. She powered the radio and used a piece of rusted fender metal to tap against the casing, sending a short-coded burst pattern. Delta had a system for emergencies. The rhythm she sent meant alive. Eastbound. Tracking. It wasn't much, but it was something. She remembered her comms training. Every signal has a range problem and a reflection solution. She stripped a thin copper wire from the truck's battery lead, wrapped it around a steel bolt, and propped it upright against the hood. Turning the metal into a crude antenna, maybe she could extend the signal a few hundred meters. Maybe enough for a patrol drone or another operator to catch the anomaly, even if no one heard. It kept her connected to procedure, to discipline. Before she left, she turned the desert into her ally. 3 small stones in a perfect line, a branch bent against its natural growth, a footprint half covered by sand. To the untrained eye, nothing. To a JSOC tracker, markers that said direction, movement, intention. If the cartel came back, they'd see signs of life where none should be. Fear would do the rest. As night came, she heard engines again. Faint, on the wind. 2 men talking. Worried. They mentioned the word phantasma. The ghost. The story had already started. Reyes lay flat, heart steady, and listened until the sound faded. Then she tapped one final message against the truck's frame. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, carrying across the cooling desert air. Raven alive. Hold position. The desert night was colder than expected. The heat that had nearly killed Emily Reyes, hours before now, drained from the ground, leaving the sand hard and sharp beneath her palms. The compound lights shimmered faintly ahead, yellow halos through the dust. The guards were jittery. Her earlier signals had worked. Patrols overlapped. Min argued. And radios hissed with static. Some of them whispered the same phrase again and again. La fantasma. The ghost. She used that fear the same way she used cover and wind as a tool. She moved low, 1 inch at a time, timing each crawl with the gusts of warm air from the generator. Every noise became part of her rhythm. The click of a lighter, the scrape of boots, the hiss of sand under a turning tire. When the smoker on the south wall flicked his cigarette, she marked his pattern. 2 drags. Flick. Pause. She waited for the next flick before she climbed. Slow and steady. Boots pressing against the rough brick. She eased over the edge, keeping her body flat against the wall. Her breathing matched the pulse in her ears, calm and measured. Inside, the compound was a blur of motion. Men argued in low voices. Weapons slung carelessly. Vargas tried to sound in control, but the edge in his voice betrayed him. Near the tarp-covered truck, Reyes saw 2 shapes. One was Huxley, her comms partner, wrists teed, head slumped. The other was a mercenary, older, posture too disciplined to be cartel. She recognized the stance of a soldier long out of uniform. He stared at a laptop screen glowing with files and photos. One image froze the room, her face half-shadowed. The call sign, Raven, marked under it. Silence spread like smoke. The older man muttered something that made the others still. He had heard of her before, from contractors and soldiers. The ghost who always came back. Vargas tried to laugh, but it came out thin. The others didn't join. The name La Fantasma began circling again, no longer as a joke. Reyes pied each corner with precision, scanning angles, controlling light discipline. She moved closer, crouching behind stacked crates. She tapped twice against the wall. Pause. 3 times. The delta pattern for alive. Huxley stirred, eyes fluttering open. He heard it. She tapped again. Slower this time. The sound barely louder than the wind. A guard turned his head, frowning. The older mercenary froze. From the shadows, the faint light caught the small raven tattoo behind her ear. Someone breathed her nickname like a prayer. La Fantasma. Reyes stayed motionless, letting the legend finish what the signal had started. The courtyard was frozen. Dust hung in the air like smoke after a blast, and every man there seemed to hold his breath at once. Staff Sergeant Emily Reyes stood just inside the gate, her torn uniform streaked with sand and sweat. The faint light from the generator cast her shadow long across the ground. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then the shift began tiny, instinctive. The youngest gunman lowered his rifle without realizing it. Another eased a step back. The old mercenary, the one with the quiet eyes and straight posture, recognized something in her stance. He rolled his rifle to low ready, not as surrender but acknowledgement. Soldier to soldier. Reyes didn't speak right away. Silence had weight. And she used it. When she finally did, her voice was level. The cadence of command stripped to its essentials. Move. Huxley reacted first. Dragging himself up beside the Navy linguist and the local medic, she raised 2 fingers to her eyes. Watch. An open palm. Hold. A slow circular motion near her knee. Move. They followed without hesitation. Each step calculated. Quiet. Her control wasn't built on intimidation. It was the gravity of someone who had already survived the worst day possible and learned to function inside it. Vargas's arrogance cracked in the stillness. His men weren't looking at him anymore. He tried to pull their focus back, shouting half-formed orders. When that failed, he drew his pistol. The barrel wavered. The old mercenary stepped forward. Gap in hand, lowering it in a small gesture of respect, the kind of gesture that once crossed battlefields. It wasn't submission. It was truth. He had seen her kin before. The ones who didn't flinch. Outside, a sound began to build, a low rhythmic thump rolling through the desert air. Water blaze. The rescue force, the code she'd tapped hours ago, had reached home. Every head turned toward the noise. Reyes didn't. Her eyes stayed on Vargas. He tried to speak, but no words came. She told him quietly to think about what side he wanted to be on when morning came. The words landed heavier than any threat. The rotors drew closer, shaking the compound walls. Sand lifted off the ground in spirals. Reyes gave her team a single nod and walked them toward the gate. Behind her, no one fired. No one moved. The courtyard held its breath. The only sound left was the steady beat of helicopters and the calm voice of command that never needed to shout. The first sound was distant, almost part of the wind. Then it grew, low and heavy, rolling across the desert like thunder. 2 MH-60M Black Hawks from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment came in fast from the north, their rotor blades cutting through the dawn air. The rhythm was steady, disciplined. Not a rescue in panic, but an operation in motion. Dust swirled up from the compound, filling the courtyard in a storm of sand and light. Men dropped to their knees, shielding their faces. The cartel guards shouted, half in fear, half in disbelief. Reyes didn't move. She stood at the center, eyes fixed on the incoming aircraft. The first helicopter hovered 20 feet above the compound, its crew chief signaling the fast rope team. 4 operators slid down in quick succession, boots hitting the ground, weapons raised but muzzles low. They moved like a single machine, sweeping the perimeter, securing corners, setting up a 360-degree defense. The second bird followed, medics and additional operators dropping next to the trucks. Their movements were clean, rehearsed. No wasted motion. The lead operator, a lieutenant colonel with Delta insignia, approached Reyes through the haze. He stopped in front of her and saluted. The gesture was brief, but in that moment it carried more than protocol. Respect earned in silence. Reyes returned the salute. Her uniform was torn, her wrists still wrapped in field dressings, but her stance was steady. The wind from the rotors whipped her hair across her face. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Medics moved past her, checking Huxley and the local medic, calling out vitals over encrypted radios. The older mercenary who had stayed his hand the night before lowered his rifle and placed his cap over his heart. He didn't speak. Vargas stood near the wall, pistol lowered, eyes hollow. The fear that had driven him now seemed small in the face of order. The extraction moved fast. The wounded were lifted first. Reyes climbed in last, gripping the door frame as the Black Hawk began to rise. The vibration ran up through her boots, the smell of jet fuel mixed with the sharp desert air. Below her, The compound grew smaller, the men turning into shadows against the gold of the rising sun. She leaned back against the seat, breathing evenly. The desert stretched wide beneath her, endless and quiet again. It had taken almost everything, but not her purpose. Survival, she realized, wasn't about power or revenge. It was about bringing people home. The desert doesn't break you. It shows you what's left when everything else is gone. The air inside the Forward Field Hospital was thick with antiseptic and dust. Generators hummed outside the canvas walls, their steady vibration mixing with the occasional cough or quiet order from a medic. Staff Sergeant Emily Reyes sat on a cot near the edge of the tent, her bandaged wrists resting lightly on her knees. Her uniform was torn and sun-faded, her hair still carrying grains of desert sand. But her posture was steady, eyes alert. Across from her, Corporal Huxley lay beneath a thin blanket, an oxygen mask tilted to one side. He murmured in his sleep, shifting slightly when the cold night air slipped through the seams of the tent. Medics moved with quiet precision, voices clipped and calm, the metallic click of trays marking their rhythm. A Delta commanding officer interred, clipboard in hand, his expression professional but not detached. He sat across from Reyes, asking short, methodical questions. Times, distances, radio conditions, number of hostiles. She answered each one with the same deliberate tone, her words exact, uncolored by emotion. When he commended her for initiative under fire, she only nodded. It wasn't initiative, she said. It was habit. He smiled faintly and told her, Delta doesn't train humility. She met his eyes and said it trains people to know what matters when the noise stops. That ended the conversation. Hours later, the camp quieted. The desert wind grew colder, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel from the landing pad. Reyes walked the perimeter, hands in her pockets, boots crunching over the gravel. Around here, soldiers spoke in low voices. Some laughed too loudly. Some stared into the dark. She stopped beside the last cot, where Huxley was awake, eyes open to the night sky. He told her he couldn't sleep, that he kept hearing the sand move. She told him that was good. It meant he was still listening. The words carried more comfort than they seemed to. When she returned to her cot, she sat by a small heater, its glow soft against the canvas. She pulled a small field notebook from her pocket and wrote a single line. Selection isn't about who survives the hardest day. It's about who stays human after it. The first light of morning stretched over the camp. Medics loaded the wounded into medevac helicopters. The rotors stirred the sand into gold. Reyes watched them lift and thought about what Delta had really taught her. Not how to be invincible, how to endure with grace when everything else falls apart.